So in 2015, I began to see friction in different parts of my life that God had been triggering and asking me to surrender. And for a long time, I had been in denial. And so I lost my job. I didn't have a job. I was pregnant at the time with my second son, and my marriage had pretty much dissolved. There was just the point where we had reached where he had decided that he no longer wanted to have a family and have um, me. And I struggled with that because I didn't want to be a single mother. I didn't want to not have a relationship. So it was painful for me to see that someone decided that they would remove themselves from something that they were so dedicated to early on. So it was a trying time. I also didn't have um, the resources to maintain my house. I was losing a lot of things in my life, and with that, I didn't have insurance, and so I didn't know what to do. There was a lot of things that I felt were losing moments, but um, it built upon a lot of hurt and frustration, and I became the circumstance that I had with God, or the encounter I had with God, was I was frustrated with Him, and I was angry with Him because all these things that meant so much to me, He saw fit to remove them from my life. And that brought on a lot of resentment and a lot of pain. And at that moment, I couldn't see outside of the circumstance. I couldn't see enough to want to find myself pray and want to figure out or explore what God was having for me. A lot of times when you go through these situations and these sufferings, um, some people feel like they have the faith enough to understand that there is something better that God has for you. But for me, in that exact moment, I was unaccepting of the something better that God had for me. I wanted what I already had, and I refused to allow the acceptance in my heart for God to remove these things for me. My kids, they have a need. They have a need for lunch, for their school lunch. I have to prepare their school lunch. I have to make sure that there's food in the house for them. That's my biggest priority as a mother. So one day, it was closer to Christmas time, which was around the time that my son was to be born. And I went to the grocery store. I plan out a lot, and so I budget myself um, very strictly, and I regiment things out. So I knew that although I had the money, something wouldn't get paid if I paid for these groceries. And I'm thinking to myself in my heart, God, I don't know. I don't really know how I'm going to pay for these groceries. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do here, but I need some help. And so there have been a lot of people around me because it was that time of year and they were shopping and getting ready for the holidays and for whatever festivities that they had. There was also police officers within the grocery store, and they were looking around, but I wasn't necessarily focused on and paying attention to what they were doing. And then one of them walks up next to me as I am beginning to self pay or self check out for my groceries. And he leans over and he says, I'm going to pay for your groceries. And it was such an emotional time for me because it was as if God had explicitly heard what I had been saying in my heart. Especially when I was going through so much drastic change within my life, for this police officer who didn't know me say that he would pay for my groceries it was as if manna had came from heaven for me during that time. My reaction to the police officer was shock, just complete utter shock and gratitude, not only to him, and he was very humbled by my appreciation, that it showed me that it was something with outside of himself to do this for me. And I began to sob and weep on the inside, and really appreciate God for understanding my needs and knowing and never always considering my kids before anything, and making sure that they never go without, never have to suffer, even though he was transitioning me, or God was transitioning me out of something. My kids never had to know what that suffering was. The experience that I had in 2015, and even in that grocery store in that moment, my relationship with God was enhanced, and it taught me that He is, one, a mender of brokenness. There was a lot of pain and brokenness and suffering that I had began to accept and to think was normal. I began to feel that dysfunction was okay. And I realized that in that moment that God said to my heart that He wants so much more for me. And so I realized, because I had been in my marriage and in my relationship with this person for 8 to 12, we were together for like 12 years. And so I realized that God was very patient, because I knew early on that this relationship was not what God wanted or had purpose for my life initially. And I swept it under the rug. Oh no, God, this is great, and He's amazing, and these are all of His qualities. And I tried to convince God of something that just He knew He had better and could do better for me. And so in that experience and in that moment, I realized that God was patient, that God would see me through this, and He would work in me when the opportunity best fit itself for Him to come out and showcase His love for me. But He also is a mender of brokenness that I didn't even realize that He could do for me. I just was lost in so much of the hurt and the dysfunction. And I also realized in that moment and in that encounter at the grocery store that God is also a supplier of your needs, even though you don't cry out and express the hurt and the pain, that He hears your innermost secretive thoughts, and that He's able to search within you, and that He sees you in the midst of all the people in the grocery store. There could have been 50 to 100 people in that grocery store, but He saw me. He saw me, and He picked me, and He heard all the pain and the suffering that I had. And He supplied for my kids, but they needed beyond my suffering and the things that He was doing in my life. And so I really feel like God has always been my Father, and He's always taken care of me, and He's always seen my heart in the midst of everything that goes on in this world. All of the billions of people, He saw me, and He thought of me to help me in that situation. God is my lover. And I know that sounds, very peculiar as a woman, but I realize that sometimes I pray that, God, I need your warmth. God, I need your love. But in the midst of hurt, and in the midst of someone telling you that you're not good enough, or that you're not beautiful enough, I needed love, and I needed that affirmation and that validation. And I knew that I did not want to get it from an outside source. And so He quickly showed me that He is my lover, that He is the person who gives me warm hugs and holds me at night and listens to my innermost thoughts. And He walks with me in my loneliness and in my hurt and in my pain. So for me, God is my lover, and I am in relationship with God, and it feels warm. It feels like joy, and it feels like the purest of happiness to know that He is holding my hand and to see how He is um, growing me and even still patient with me through the moments when I have frustrations and I say, God, I'm not talking to you right now. I'm not doing this with you right now. So for me, I am in utter and sheer relationship with God, and He is that lover that I need. My Bible verse would be Second Chronicles chapter 20, verse 15, where he says, "The battle is not yours, but mine." And that for me means a lot because in the beginning of all of this in 2015, I was I was fighting God. I refused to accept and allow what God was doing in my life. And my prayers were reproaches and me going to God. Like, how could you do this to me? How could you allow this to happen? And so once I began to realize that I needed to surrender this to God and I needed to go to Him and tell Him about all my hurt, all my pain, and all my suffering, and then let it go. I realized that it wasn't my battle and it wasn't something that I felt I had to face, but that He was doing the work in me if I would just allow Him to. There was a point, there was a significant, a long period in my life, and I shared this with my friends and family, where I just didn't know how to pray. I had been done with the crying. I just cried so much that I walked through a season of being dry. I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to address it. And um, I didn't want to let it go, because I didn't know how. And so when you're in that moment and when you're living out that hurt, I just want you to realize and I just want you to know that God sees your heart and that He hears your innermost thoughts. If you would just allow the acceptance to come inside. And I know that that may be hard, but even if you feel the urge to moan, and one thing, when I told God this and I was upset, He would send me songs and He would allow Himself to work within me with a song. And every single day He would send me one song that just meant so much significance to me, and He would allow me to express myself because I couldn't find the words and I couldn't find the way to pray, or I had been a Christian since I was 11 or 12 years old, and I completely forgot how to pray. And so He will send you things. You just have to just open your eyes and see these things. And I understand that you may be looking around, but He will surely give you the grace. And just realize that it is sweeter on the other side. Every single day I walk and I get up out of bed and I just am so filled with joy. I'm filled with so much peace and so much love at the realization of everything that God has for me. And so these things will come. I would just say to just be patient with God, and beyond anything and everything, just find within yourself, if you can, just the ability to love yourself, and He will walk you through that. And He